Thank you, everybody. So yeah, let's talk about hiring a game writer for your beautiful titles. So first of all, my name is Bertine van Heuvel. I have been making games since 2006. I started out in educational games, and then I moved into the commercial space very slowly. I've worked with very large companies like Ubisoft, like Paradox, and very, very tiny one-person companies. These are some of the titles I've worked on, and they're all beautiful and lovely, and I love the people I've worked with. So, specifically in this talk, we are going to talk about a narrative production timeline. I know it's 10:30 in the morning, and I'm going to be bothering you with a narrative production timeline. We're going to be talking about onboarding your narrative professional, and also how to hire your narrative professional, and some of the details to pay attention to. Now, obviously, this is a subject that I could probably talk about 2 hours for, but we only have 20 minutes. So if you have any questions afterwards about specific details, please come to me, and I will be happy to tell you everything about that. Now, big caveat, my experiences are primarily in the indie space to the AA space, and they mostly pertain to freelancing, which means that if you're going to be onboarding a full-time narrative person, there might be some changes, but most of the advice I'm going to be giving to you is going to be largely the same. But first, we're going to talk about 2 things that people very often ask me before their game production is starting. Namely, what's the difference between a game writer and a narrative designer? So I made a beautiful list so that you can all learn about the big difference. We have a game writer, we have a narrative designer, and it turns out there's not a lot of difference. There are historical reasons to why the title narrative designer exists, but when you're actually going to be looking at the job adverts for a narrative designer or for a game writer, you see a little bit of a difference that a narrative designer is expected to do some additional production tasks, design tasks, and also some implementation. While a game writer doesn't always get to do some implementation, but they do tend to get a little bit more on the direction side, and most importantly, on the vision keeper side. The other question I often get is, what should I do first, construct a narrative or design the game? And obviously, the answer is yes. The reason is that narrative and game design is actually much more closely entwined than you may think. Most people, when they think about the narrative of their game, they immediately think about the player-facing story, about the text that you're going to be encountering in the game, while the narrative is much more about the overall experience of enjoying story within a game. For example, you have a game that is about delving into dungeons and slaying monsters. Now, this already tells me something about the game design itself, namely you're going to be delving into a dungeon and you're going to be slaying monsters. But it also tells me something about the narrative, namely that you're going to be going into a dungeon and slaying monsters. So you can already see that from the very start, you're going to be dealing with a little bit of a narrative part of your game. This can also go for very heavily systemic games, because the question is, where are you going to put your factory game? Is it going to be in a fantasy world, or is it going to be on an alien planet? Already by making that decision, you're already making a narrative-based decision. It doesn't mean that you immediately need to onboard a narrative professional at that stage, but it's worth talking to somebody at least about this. Next up, we're going to talk about the most exciting part of this whole presentation, which is the production development stages of your narrative. Whenever I get attached to a project, I very often encounter that people are not too familiar about what a game writer does and what specific stage of the development process. Now, this is a very rough way of subdividing the tasks. It really depends on what type of game you're going to be developing, because, for instance, if you have a very text-heavy game, specifically if you've got a very heavy voice acting text-based game, you will have to get your voice acting into the production stage rather than in the alpha stage. Likewise, if you're going to have a lot of text, you're going to have to move your localization much earlier in your development timeline than during the alpha stage. If you're going to do that localization, by the way, this is just a really key piece of advice, Make sure that you're going to have some quality assurance over your localization. So that's called QLoc. That's basically somebody who's going to read all of your localization tags. And this will basically prevent a lot of angry Steam reviews written in Chinese. Because I swear, about 50% of those Steam reviews, they're basically complaining about the bad quality of the Chinese localization. Now, you see a few of these things being highlighted, and I would like to pay some special attention to them, which is, the first one is thematic exploration. Now, thematic exploration has a little bit of a bad reputation because people immediately think it's something pretentious or it's something artistic. And I'm sorry, we're making games, so we are already pretentious and artistic. Thematic exploration is important because if you are going to settle on your themes very early in the game development process, that is going to inform what type of decision making you're going to be doing later on. For instance, your theme is it's found family or it's brotherhood. And then later on in the development stage, you need to start making a prioritization between whether you're going to be working on your team building mechanics or on your shopping mechanics. If you already know at that stage that your theme is going to be, well, found family, your team building mechanics are going to be more important to convey that theme to your player than your shopping mechanics. Now, game writers are specialized in working with these type of themes. So when you get them on board at the concepting phase, they're going to help you out distilling the themes of your game so that you can use these themes later on in the process and later on in the production to make it easier for you to make more cohesive decisions and quicker decisions. We're going to go to technical setup, which is essentially about how is text going to be displayed in your game. There are a lot of implementations that you can use for that sort of purpose. The reason why you want to get a narrative person on board at that specific stage is because they can tell you, for example, that there are differences between all of these different implementations and that they're going to have influence on the type of game you're going to be making. For instance, if you're going to opt for an ink implementation, that is a very powerful narrative tool. It is very flexible. It can make you do things with your narrative that is really cool. But it's also scripting based. So whoever is going to be working with you needs to know how to do scripting. Technical setup is also important about the type of file types you're going to be using. There's going to be differences between engines, whether they're going to be taking a CSV file or whether they're working in JSON or any other type of like text-based file sizes or file types. Again, when you make these decisions, try to make them earlier on, because again, that's going to be influencing what type of things that your game writer can do, how easy it is going to be to do the implementation, and well, what type of game that you can build with this. My recommendation is not to work in something like a Word or a Google Docs. The reason is that very often that means that you're going to have to copy and paste things from your Google Docs into your game. And the amount of bugs that happen between the Ctrl-C and the Ctrl-V is, please do not work in Google Docs. You will thank me later. I would like to focus a little bit on the UI design feedback. Try to get your writer or your narrative professional to talk to the person who's in charge of your UI, because the way how your text is going to be displayed in your game is going to be very relevant for the player experience. Most games try to do as little text as possible, mostly kind of like it needs to be to the point, it needs to be compressed. If I'm a player and I can read it in 5 seconds, that's perfect. But again, this doesn't go for every single type of game. If you're working on a grand strategy game, for example, people really love text in those things. So you have a lot more space for your narrative professional to create a story or to also to create the type of story you're going to be doing that thing. Then we have tutorial text. Very short. It's a very, once you have settled your design, please start writing your tutorial text and start testing these tutorial texts with your audience. Tutorial texts are actually pretty hard because they both need to inform the player outside of the game, namely how do I play this game, but they also have to very often stay consistent to the game world that you're trying to present. They're kind of hard to do, and try to do them as early as possible. The last thing I would like to focus on in this specific aspect is refurbishing. Refurbishing is what happens when you have made your dungeon crawler. Finally you can go into your dungeons and you can slay the monsters. And then the number one feedback you get from your players is, well, the game is great, but why am I doing this? Who are these characters? Who are these monsters? Who are these dungeons? And that's the point that people start discovering, like, oh shit, I need to get a writer on board. I see some narrative people chuckling. So this is unfortunately an occurrence that very often happens, and then all of a sudden you very quickly need to get a narrative professional. And because we have skipped all of the concepting, pre-production, and production stages, you suddenly need to work with existing assets. You suddenly need to work within a very limited space. You have to deal with all the world building that has happened beforehand. You need to deal with a technical setup that somebody didn't really think about how to do it. It's going to cost you a lot of money because you have to go and fix a lot of things. And very often your narrative professional will need to do it in 6 weeks. So I hope you're prepared to pay for that. So again, try to get your narrative person on board as quickly as you can, because that will also save you a lot of money. Personally, I really like these jobs, not because of the money, because I think it's a really cool challenge. But I know that other people in my field think differently about that. Right, so when you're trying to onboard your game writer, this is kind of like what they need from you. I've divided this into vibes, so you know the type of game and what is informing this game, into documentation and into team. I'm just going to very quickly go over this. The concept art, obvious. Mood boards, fantastic. Chiselries, amazing. Music lists, often forgotten, but if you give me a music list about the type of music you're associating with your title, it's much easier for me to pin down what type of mood you're going to go for. Reference media. What type of games inspire you? What type of movies inspire you? What type of TV shows inspire you? And other inspirations. Maybe there's an artwork that you think is really cool. Maybe there's an artist from the 70s that is making like very specific science fiction pictures. All of these things will really help me greatly. I don't recommend using generative AI for this, by the way. And the reason is that generative AI is not very specific. It's very generic. It will start adding details to your pictures that you might not be thinking about. I very often see generative AI where it's mixing in, for example, Art Nouveau and Art Deco. If I see this as a narrative professional, I think to myself, like, why is this world both Art Nouveau and Art Deco? And then very often the person I'm talking to didn't even know that, first of all, there was a difference between it, and second of all, that this actually tells me something about the game world itself. So try to stay away from generative AI. Right, so documentation, you do need a game design document. I know that a lot of people go like, well, you don't actually need a game design document for anything. The game itself is a documentation. No, I need to know why you're making specific decisions. I need to know what you're also going to plan for later on in the implementation. So please get yourself a game design document. Technical docs, so the way how things are going to be implemented. Permissions, very often forgotten. The amount of times that I had to chase up permissions, you don't want to know. Everything in a nice, accessible place. Again, I am not being hired to find where all of your documentation is. Please, please make it easy for me. And of course, the build itself. If you have a build of your game, yes, please give it to me. I don't care what stage it is, just give it to me. Right, so your team, access to whatever sort of like communication method you're going to be given. What tasks are you expecting from me? Are you just expecting your narrative professional to write? Or would you also like them to do some scripting? Would you like them to do art briefs? Would you like them to do art bibles, whatever sort of thing? Specify these things beforehand so that these tasks can be easily put in the production schedule. Team members, very important. Again, you may think to yourself, like, why? Well, obviously it's important that you have access to your team members. What I often see, and I see that also with other narrative professionals, is that a writer or your narrative professional is being held separately from the rest of your team. That they're only talking to the creative director, that they're only talking to the lead, and that they don't actually talk to, for example, the person who's going to be doing the implementation, the person who's going to be doing the art direction, the person who's going to be doing the sound effects. And what then happens is that if I cannot directly talk to these people, I don't know how they work, I don't know how they would like to receive instructions. I don't know where to go if, for example, the lead is occupied. This is going to make sure that you're going to have a lot more cohesion within your production and within the way how your story is going to be told. And your game writer needs your trust. Please trust your game writer. See, they're not there to replace you. In my experience, because I then very often work with like a game director or with the narrative lead, they get a little uncomfortable because essentially they're giving me their baby. And that puts you in a very vulnerable position because you're like, well, shit, I've worked on this game for so long, I've worked on this story for so long. And now I'm just going to be giving it to this random person who may not really understand my vision. But your narrative professional is not there to replace you. Your narrative professional is there to aid you, especially later on in production. Because when you are running a production, when you get to the actual production stage, when you're going to get to the late stage of your production, you're going to be too busy to make all of those narrative decisions yourself. Please trust your writer with this. They will help you out. So yes, they're there to support you. They also don't want to be mean to you. I say this explicitly because, again, when you are giving your baby to somebody else, and they occasionally go like, hey, your baby might be a little sexist. It's not because you're sexist. It's because your narrative designer has discovered that there's an element within your story or within your world building that might be implying some things that you don't necessarily want to be implying. If you are going to receive that sort of feedback, it's not to be mean. It's literally your game professional, your writing professional is there to make your game better. They don't care about you. They actually care about your baby. But also, please don't lecture them. Sometimes what happens is that a lead feels like they're not being fully understood, and then they call up their narrative professional, and then I'm sitting there for about an hour listening to this poor man telling me that I don't really understand his vision. Sometimes that also happens, by the way, that I'm not perfect. But in very often, if he would have just simply, or she, or they, would have just simply asked me like, hey, Bertine, why did you make this specific decision? I would have been able to tell them, and then they would have been able to say like, oh, actually, I didn't mean for that. I meant for something else. Very quickly, very to the point. Again, this will happen. It's not your fault if you're going to be running a game or directing a game, but it's something to pay attention to. Your writer needs your feedback. Please give feedback in time. Again, 4 weeks after I deliver my text, it might be a little late. Please give me feedback in time. If you approve something, it is approved. If you're going to be changing the themes of your game later on in production, it just means that I have to change a lot of text. If, for example, your paladin is no longer a paladin, but just a knight, that is going to have a lot of influence on, well, which abilities I would be able to infer within the narrative itself. So if you're going to be making these decisions, either make sure that you're just going to approve them, or if you're going to change those decisions, please involve your writer so they know what's happening. Also let them cook. In real life too, most narrative people I know are excellent cooks, but more specifically, it won't be exactly what you want, but it might be better. And this is a comment I have heard from a lot of people, not just me, but I hear the same thing from other narrative professionals, that this is a comment I see often, is that, yeah, the first time you're going to receive a bit of writing back from your narrative professional, it's not going to be 100% the thing that you thought it was going to be, but it might actually be the thing that you want it to be. Now, when hiring a narrative professional, first of all, you need to know what type of writing you're going to be needing. There is a lot of different types of text that you could be needing for your game. Not all games need this amount of text or the same type of text, but the type of text that you need is going to influence what type of writer you need to hire. There are writers who are specialized in branching dialogues, there are writers who are specialized in barks, in screenplays, UI text, etc., etc. If you're going to interview a writer, make sure that you ask them about your specific desires for your text or your storytelling within your game. Same thing, by the way, as a writer, besides doing production text, you're also going to be writing a lot of team-facing text, so production plans, story bibles, etc., etc. You need to think about in what stage you're going to be hiring, so which production stage, what technical skills you require, whether they need to do scripting implementation, very important. What game development experience, the difference between a senior and a junior, may influence what you actually need for your game. Very often you can just hire a junior. Please give them some chances. They're wonderful people, they're very talented. But sometimes, especially when it comes down for refurbishing, it might be worth getting yourself a senior. Any additional expertise you need. That can be a subject matter, such as, for example, marine biology. If you find yourself a writer who is specialized in marine biology and that is going to be very relevant for your game, it's worth trying to see whether they also have the other skills that you require for your game. Sometimes lived experiences can also be super useful. Try not to hire somebody purely based on the lived experiences, because often that means you're going to be tokenizing them, and that's just not going to be fun for you nor for them in the long run. But their experiences can definitely have a very good influence on your game. And otherwise, if you don't have any of these additional experiences, you can always interview people. I love interviewing people for the type of expertise as I need, but do make sure that you have some time within your schedule for that. Right, finally, writing tests. I generally try to discourage writing tests, mostly because you will be wasting their time and you will be wasting your own time. Because if for every single applicant you can be sending them a writing test, you're going to be sending off a lot of writing tests and you're going to have to read all of them. The other reason is because people who will be doing the writing tests are the people who are going to take time to do them, which means that you don't necessarily get the person that you want for your project, just the person who had time to do the writing test for you. So try only to do these sort of things where you're not too sure whether these people have the expertise on a specific thing. So yeah, you're making a horror, but the portfolio only contains spycraft. Please write some horror for me. You're great. I mean, the portfolio looks great, but you have no experience writing story bibles. Please give me a setup about how you would approach that. That is going to be a useful writing test for you and for them. All right. So, finally, hiring early gets you the most bang for your buck. Yeah, make sure that the whole team knows what your writer is doing, and please trust them, please. Thank you.
Wow, that is a lot of work that goes into hiring a narrative designer. We have a few minutes left, so is there really a question here that is boiling? Yes.
Bertine, thank you so much for this. This is so enlightening, and I finally feel that my place is at the union.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, wonderful.
Because I will explain. I have my own company here in Rotterdam, and last year I set up a talent development program, but for writers in the audiovisual sector, and that was a pilot. So now I want to upskill, because like this, writing for games or for virtual reality or for theater, it is also necessary. And you give me so much insight. So my final question is, do you also give like workshops?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to.
So I would love to talk to you further.
Yeah, sure. No, Alia.
Okay, that's beautiful. That's going to be a conversation afterwards, I'm quite certain. Was there another question in? Yes, okay.
Well, is the native language of the writer important?
That depends on, actually, it mostly depends on if you need to do additional research. If you're going to do, for example, your game is set during the time of the French Revolution, it would be wonderful if your writer is able to read French, simply so that they have access to first sources. Generally speaking, it doesn't really matter, only if it just happens to be very relevant for your specific project.
Yeah.
I will say, especially when you have a lot of text, either you leave a lot of space so the writer has time to do text editing, or get yourself an additional editor on board. It's also worth getting an additional editor on board if you need to do specific dialects or specific ways of talking. For example, if you're going to be doing African American vernacular English, don't let your white writer mess around. Get somebody on board who is familiar with that and specifically familiar with the dialect spoken in that specific area of the United States.
Okay, I have one small last question. How do you get new inspiration when you work on so many titles?
So here's the thing: is that Hideo Kojima had like a little stick with all of his game development ideas, and I stole it.
Beautiful. Okay. I see. Well, that's a lot of knowledge there. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing us how you.